After working with over 1,000 different entrepreneurs through our courses and programs, I've realized that there are really two problems that stop people from becoming a full-time entrepreneur. Number one, it's that they get stuck in corporate and the comfortability of corporate, and then having to make that transition to entrepreneurship and the unknown is very tough. And then number two is that they can't make any sales, which makes that transition even harder. Well, today we have a guest who's coming on the podcast to show you and talk you through how she went from corporate to entrepreneurship, back to corporate to entrepreneurship, and has mastered the art of sales, especially for introverts. So get ready and keep on listening.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today we have a special guest, which I'm really excited to dig into, because as I started to go through her story and her interests and the things that she does, I was like, wow, we actually have a lot of stuff in common. So I know it's gonna be a very great conversation. It's gonna leave you guys with a ton of lessons. And today we have Leah Neaderthal from Smart Gets Paid. So Leah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited. And I think what I'm most excited about is just to kind of hear your story, because it sounds like there's going to be a lot of lessons. But I also think what you do now and what you teach is going to be very valuable for a lot of the listeners, because I think a lot of us are introverts, and I know you kind of help the introvert do their thing. So I don't want to explain what you do. So do you mind just telling us a little bit of what you currently do now, and then we'll hop into your story?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a sales coach for women entrepreneurs. I teach women how to land higher paying clients, specifically in their consulting and coaching businesses. So what does that mean? It means I help women get more yeses, start to work with the clients that they want, and get paid dramatically more for every contract.
Okay, amazing. And why women? Why not everyone?
Why women? I think that, I will acknowledge this is probably a skill that a lot of entrepreneurs are uncomfortable with and have a hard time with. But I think there are specific things about the experience of how women are raised and how we are socialized and the messages we inherit and internalize that particularly work against us in our businesses and in the sales process.
Right.
So, and I know that intimately because I've experienced them myself. Right. So I think I can speak to that. And so that's why I just want to sort of solve this problem for the women and the people who I feel like experience it the most.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that's great news, because I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but about 70% of our audience is women. So I think it would be super helpful for all of them. And I know you came from a corporate background, and I'm sure also just being a woman in the corporate field is not the easiest thing. I know that it's, tend to be a little bit more male dominated. And so I think what you're doing is great, and I think it's completely needed. But how did you get into all of this stuff? Like, were you always an entrepreneur? Did you start off in corporate? Like, where does your story sort of begin?
Yeah, well, so my story starts in corporate. After I graduated from college, I got the best corporate job I could. I worked at a really large advertising agency in Chicago, and I worked there for 3 years and got the next best job, like we're very sort of programmed and primed to do,
right.
At a different agency. And then I went in-house and worked at a mid-sized tech company. And that brought me to about 2010. And that was like the last job I got. Or the last job I had.
Okay.
So up to that point, I wouldn't have called myself very entrepreneurial at all.
Right.
But around that time, I quit my job. I'd saved up all this money, quit my job, and started on what was going to be a year-long trip around the world, like backpacking to see as much of the world as I could. And so I, started backpacking, and I don't know if you've ever been backpacking.
Yeah, I've gone. I used to go before kids. I used to go several times a year. In fact, that's what we did for my bachelor party. Is we just got a bunch of guys and threw all our stuff in backpacks and we went backpacking. So yeah, very familiar with backpacking.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many good things about it, but what my backpacking partner and I found was that after about 3 weeks, it was kind of a blur, you know? Like we were just sort of floating on the surface of the places we were seeing, not really experiencing much of it. And so somewhere between like, I don't know, Nicaragua and Panama, we decided that instead of trying to do this year-long trip, squeeze the whole year or the whole world into 1 year and then go back and live the rest of our lives under fluorescent lights working for somebody else.
Right.
What if we started a business and started this life that would allow us to live anywhere? And that's what we did. We started a marketing and web design agency, and that was going to be our first, consulting.
Gotcha. Okay. And
consulting company.
You started that in 2010?
By that time, it was like 2011.
2011.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then, and what happened? How'd it go?
It actually went great. So, like when you first start a business, oftentimes you announce to the world that you're doing this and you get your first clients. And that was sort of how we got our first clients. And then we actually cut our trip short to about 8 months and then came back to the States to, try to drum up some business so that we could keep traveling after that. And that's where like it got a little hairy because as soon as I got back to the States, I think like as soon as I landed on US soil, like all of that corporate conditioning just came back with a fury. I was like, I need the health insurance. I need the 401k. I need the matching, like all of this stuff. And I started to panic. Like our only job at that time was to get clients so that we could leave again and keep traveling. And like, I could not do it. Like, I didn't know how to start conversations. I didn't know how to have a meeting. We'd have these calls booked and I would be like, I would hope they cancel. Please, like I just sort of wish that they would cancel.
Right.
And I was so paralyzed that I actually went back and got a corporate job.
Okay. And would you say that you went back to corporate because all these things that we were told we needed started to weigh on your shoulders? Or was it because sales weren't coming in or sales were coming in, but you were just terrified of doing it or you didn't like doing it? Like what was the main reason why you ended up going back?
I'd say because sales weren't coming in and I didn't know what to do. And also I'm a type A overachiever. And if I don't know how to do something and it's hard, it's, that's like the worst combination for me.
Right.
So, and we had to make money. Right. Like, so I went back and got a job. And
where did you go back to?
I went back to a PR firm in San Francisco.
Okay, cool. And then how did that go? Like how did the transition from being entrepreneur, like corporate to entrepreneur to back to corporate, like how did that feel? Because I would imagine as an overachiever, you may have been suffering from like, I don't know. I'll just ask you, how did you label that transition in your mind and how did you process it all?
Yeah. Well, on one hand, it was such a relief, I was probably in the most senior position I had held, up to that point, making the most money I had. But on the other hand, I mean, it was awful, like, can you imagine running your own thing for, at that point, it'd been like 8 or 9 months and then having to go back to this environment with like the politics and, just everything that comes with like an office job, not to like knock office jobs entirely. There's, it works for a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, having had that freedom and then going back into that environment, like I only lasted about 6 months, but I have to tell you, like after 2 weeks, I was like, this is it.
Yeah, it didn't take long. And I remember even, when you're an entrepreneur and you have that internal drive, like being put back in a cage or a box, so to speak, it's not where you want to be. And I remember before I started my business, I was working for my dad. It was like, I was 20 something years old. I was making $70,000 a year. This is like 12 years ago. So even by today's standards, that's really good money, especially as a 24-year-old. And, I could kind of take time off when I wanted to. And I just remember sitting there going like, I hate this. Like on paper, that was an easy like job that people would have loved to have had. And I hated it because that internal drive was for something else, to not be trapped was so strong. So I'd imagine like you were experiencing the same thing. But I would also imagine at some point, because it sounds like you left after 6 months, there may have been a moment or something that caused this shift, or were you just tired of being in corporate and you wanted to give it another go? Like, how did that period end for you?
Yeah, like I said, a few weeks in, I was like, this is not right. But I stuck with it for a while just so we could sort of get our feet under us financially. And yeah, I just didn't want to play the corporate game anymore. Yeah. I was dealing with, there's a lot of office politics, because honestly, because I didn't enjoy that job so much. And it was so short. I literally took it off my LinkedIn. I took it off everything. To me, it's it served a purpose because it reminded me that I actually did want to run my own business.
Right.
And so, yeah, that drive to have that independence, the drive to, I don't know, it's like little things. I didn't want to do the commute. I didn't want to have to pass by the same people 30 times in the hallway and pretend like I'm saying hello to them with the same enthusiasm every single time. Right. You know how you do. To, bigger things. I believed I could do this. I could do great work. I could do it in the way I wanted to do it and the way I knew I could do it. But I didn't want to put myself back into that place where I was before, where I knew I had to get clients, but I just felt so stuck, so paralyzed from a not knowing what to do perspective, but also just all of my internal mindset stuff was keeping me, was making me really uncomfortable doing it. Yeah. And so that's the moment when I realized, if I'm going to do this work, if I'm going to run this business, if I'm going to serve the clients that I want, I have to learn how to sell.
Right.
But I didn't want to do it the way I'd seen other people try to sell to me. Right. I wanted to do it in a way that felt comfortable. I'm a total introvert. I always tell people, I'm not going to shake 1,000 hands.
Right.
So I needed to do it in a way that felt comfortable, that played to my strengths, that built great relationships, and that worked.
Yeah. What were some of those other ways that people were kind of traditionally selling to? Because you said you didn't want to sell the same way you were being sold to. What were some of those tactics or methods that people were using that you didn't like?
Yeah. When I was in a position at the tech company and at this PR firm, people were trying to sell me software and, other stuff like that. I was in a position to take those vendors on.
Right.
God, at this point, I can't remember, but it's all the things that you see about, little tactics, when you are being sold to using a sales tactic.
Right.
I wish I could draw upon them now, but I think I've just put them so far
it's out of your mind. Yeah. Well, I think what it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just the approach people take where the intention is literally let me just take your money. And I don't know what your approach is specifically, but I know for introverts to kind of come in almost in an intrusive way with the intention of, hey, let me say the right things in order to just take your money. It doesn't sit well with a lot of introverts, just because that's just not your personalities to be so aggressive and intentional and objection busting this and that. And of course, all those things need to happen, but I think it's more of that aggressive approach versus more of a gentler approach or whatever. Cause I'm the same way. I had to, when I was broke, I actually had to walk door to door, just to pay the bills, selling to certain things from business to business. I had to do that a lot actually. And as an introvert, it's the most terrifying thing ever. And so I remember my hand literally shaking when I'm handing out flyers because I was so scared when I was doing it. But that my approach was very similar, where I couldn't be that aggressive, let me smooth talk you, whatever type of salesperson. It just wasn't who I was.
Yeah.
So
I think,
go ahead.
I think just sort of it's, as it comes back to me, I think the things that really just were such a turnoff for me are the sort of pitching style, getting on the phone and not asking questions, just sort of starting to pitch.
Yeah.
And, when that's happening and it doesn't feel good. especially if you're an introvert. Introverts are great at listening, right? Introverts are great at like asking questions and reading the room and all of these things. And so that wasn't happening, which is, why my approach doesn't involve any pitching now. And, so stuff like that, just,
yeah.
Sorry, this is like a cut moment.
No, it's good. I understand what you're saying. It's embracing the things that come natural to an introvert, but ironically, because I think we've been so conditioned to think that introverts can't sell, like it is an extrovert thing, that you tend to miss these elements that are necessary for sales. And it's the same thing with messaging. As I tell people, like, you need to listen. You need to meet people where they're at. Like, it's never about where you are at. You need to meet them where they're at. You need to meet the audience where they're at. And that's where your communication style, that's where the communication should start. But when you're an extrovert and you're just trying to follow a script or a pitch, you're completely neglecting where the person's at. And I think what I hear you saying is that with introverts, the skills that we have is listening, reading the room, which allows us to meet people where they're at. And really, that's how you build rapport. Like, that's how you start to build that connection. So to bring it back to your story, when you made this transition back to entrepreneurship, like, what were some of the things that you started to focus on when it did come to sales? Like, how did you go from not being able to make sales to corporate to now going back on yourself and then starting to improve on your sales game? Like, what were some of the things that you started doing?
Yeah, I just started reading every single thing I could get my hands on. Like every single thing. Some sales books, but also a lot of stuff that's not from selling, books about psychology or social dynamics or entrepreneurship or online marketing. And I read every single thing I could get my hands on, which turned into, I have a list of 65 books that I read during that time. And, a lot of it, I started to sort of weave it into the process of talking to the clients we were actually talking to. I would sort of see, let me see if I can test this out. Let me see how this feels. And I would try it on for size. And anything that felt salesy or pushy or aggressive or disingenuous, I just ditched. But a lot of it, especially the stuff from outside of selling, felt really comfortable and good and wholesome and kept me like in my integrity.
Right.
And that's what I started to use over and over. And then, the other thing is I just really started listening. I mean, it's our best skill.
Right.
I just started listening, not just to, what the clients were saying about their pain points and, other stuff, but listening to how they were making decisions. Because, when you're selling, so I teach women how to sell into companies, and that's companies from solopreneur all the way up to, large companies. And, I think part of the conversation around how to sell really overlooks a really important part, which is like, how does the client make decisions? And that's what I learned in that process. And that's what I think introverts are so good at, like, discerning, because we're so good at, not just hearing what's said, but what's not said.
Right.
So I started weaving together. I didn't realize it at the time, but essentially I was putting together a methodology that started working for me. And we started winning business, and bigger clients. And so, and using that approach, I have a 92% success rate, and I've sold $3 million in work.
Wow.
And that's the approach that I teach women today, because it does, it plays to your strengths. It's really comfortable. It builds great relationships, and it works.
Yeah. There's so many different directions I can go, and so many questions I have, but what was really interesting to me is when it comes to sales, I personally have never thought of, like, how does this person make decisions and let me cater to that. I've always listened to pain points and emotions and feelings and then addressed what they were saying, but it's never occurred to me to focus on how they make decisions. What are some of the ways that people make decisions? Like, as you start to go through this, are there like different categories of ways people make decisions? Is it different per person? Is there like a million different ways? Like, what are some of those ways?
Well, it varies from client to client, right? And individuals are different than companies, But I think a lot of it is understanding like who the stakeholders are. When I work with women who are selling into companies, they have a key contact, and then they talk and have a Zoom call and send a proposal. And when they hang up the Zoom or the phone, that person has to essentially go in and sell on the on their behalf.
Right.
And so you think about it like your client has a client. That's in companies. So who is the client's client? What is important to them? In a company, how do decisions get made? Right? These are really important questions that I don't think people realize they can actually ask. So some of the guidance I give to the women I work with is part of your sales discovery process has to be, all right, so tell me like where you guys are in this process.
Right.
Because we might think that they're coming in really hot, but they just might be gathering information. Tell me who's involved in this decision. It might have to go up the chain 3 levels, and those people are nowhere near this call. Right? So that's really important to understand, like, how do decisions get made? And if you're selling into individuals, it's sort of different, but not necessarily easier, because the client's client might be a spouse, or it might be a child, or it might be their own inherent beliefs that they need to overcome and their mindsets they need to overcome. So, the who is the stakeholder, or who are the stakeholders, is a really important part of how do you get a sale.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense now that you're saying it. Like, I almost feel kind of stupid for never like realizing this before, or like considering that, because it makes sense. I mean, if, like, for example, if someone's selling a coaching program, or you're like on a sales call to your coaching program, for example, and the person, like, they have to make a decision to join, like that's what the whole point of the call is for. And if they already know in their head that they have to convince their husband or spouse or whoever it is that to invest in this as well, you would be doing so much damage to that conversation by trying to convince them to buy and building rapport just with them, because they may even be already sold on it, and you wasted that 15 or 30 minute call focusing on them when you should be focusing on how they communicate to their husband, or here's what to say to your husband, or have you ever considered this as a way to frame it to your husband or spouse or whoever they're with, so that's really smart to do that. My question to you is how do you, where does the conversation, like, once you understand who makes the decision, or where they're on the decision making process, once you uncover that data, how does the conversation transition from there? Is it just about finding the objections and addressing them? Like, what's the next phase in all of that?
Yeah, well, there are mindset pieces and there are strategy pieces, but I want to just sort of touch on what you said, because it's such an important part of, or a common phenomenon with course creators and people who sell coaching programs. And you see this a lot, where I see it in some groups that, Facebook groups I'm in or whatever, where people say, I was on this call and they brought up that they have to talk to their spouse, and I'm so pissed because, they should be able to say yes. And, I think we've all sort of encountered that in this industry. And, how do you overcome this objection or whatever? And I think that the hard part with that is if it comes as like a surprise, as if this is something that's going to kill this opportunity. But, the way I think about it is like, it's just part of the opportunity. And if you can anticipate that, or at least not resist it, then you can work with it. Right. So how does the conversation change? A few ways. I like to think about it in terms of first, it becomes who are you selling to and how. So I think about it like you have to sort of change your mindset. You're no longer selling to your main client. You're helping your main client or main contact sell into the stakeholder. And if you think about it like that, it's like, instead of you sitting, across the table from each other, imagine like you're sitting on a bench together. And so then you can ask different questions, things like, what would make this a slam dunk for the committee or your partner or what have you, right? What do you think they need to know? would it help if I put something together? Like, I don't know, bullet points, right? So all of that, this just happened to a woman I was been working with where her main contact, she was getting a lot of resistance on how the sales process was going. They kept sort of putting up these barriers, and the main contact, my client could tell was getting a little frustrated. And so I said, why don't you just call a meeting with him? Just get on the phone for like 15 minutes and say, what's going on? Like, how can I help this? It sounds like what I'm seeing is XYZ. Is that right? And she did that. And her main contact, this guy, was like, you know what, here's the deal. And he proceeded to tell us a story about some management changes that had been going on, and some other sort of political things that were going on behind the scenes. And that's why they were putting up all these barriers. And he gave her a lot of insight into how she can work within that.
Right.
And if she hadn't approached it as like, I'm selling with this person, she never would have gotten that information. And it made the sales process go so much smoother after that.
Yeah. It really goes back to that whole analogy of like swimming upstream versus downstream. Is the more I hear you talk about it, the more I realize you're just figuring out like, how do we make the sales process swimming downstream as much as possible. Not only downstream, it's also just recognizing, okay, there's a bend in the stream, even though we're going down the stream, but we're going to start angling our body now to bend with the river that's going this direction. It's just really, it seems like it's just the path of least resistance. Because at the end of the day, a sales conversation really is you getting them to make a decision to work with you if it's the right fit. But if you're not addressing the process in which people make decisions or it's going to go, it seems kind of pointless now that I think about it. Like, it just doesn't really seem like it's even worth having a conversation if you're not going to focus on how decisions are made or what needs to happen for a decision to be made. I do want to bring it back real quick. So I had one question that I want to come back to the story is when you left corporate and then you started the new business and you kind of uncovered this methodology, what were you selling when you uncovered this philosophy or methodology that you have now?
Yeah. So we were selling, it was a marketing and website design agency. So we sold website design to nonprofits and social enterprises.
Okay.
But because at that time we were like total self-proclaimed serial entrepreneurs, we also started some other businesses. Mm. So we started a consultancy where we were helping nonprofits and social enterprises implement lean startup methodology. And later on, this is over the course of a few years, we started a business called Lesbians Who Tech, mm-hmm. which is an organization to help LGBTQ plus women and allies get into technology and grow their careers.
Right. Okay. And how did that go?
Great. It's still going. I'm no longer involved with the organization, but it's still thriving. I mean, you can go to lesbianswhotech.org and they're running events and you have a really great community.
That's awesome. Did you end up selling it or someone else take over that business?
Well, so all of these businesses I was running with my fiance at the time.
Gotcha.
And when we ended our relationship, I just felt like it was good to make a clean break. And so I sold the businesses to her and she has continued to run the businesses.
Okay. Gotcha. This may be too personal, so let me know if it is and we can definitely move on. But how was it running a business in a relationship with the other co-founder? Was it a difficult thing to navigate?
Yeah, I mean, it's touchy, right? I think that some couples do it really, really well. Mm-hmm. I think at the foundation, we had a really great vision for what we wanted to achieve. The problem was, and I think she would say this too, it was the wrong relationship. Mm-hmm. And so ending the relationship was absolutely the best idea for, it was great for both of us. And we both moved on and have like super happy families and all of that.
Right.
But some of the problems that we experienced in the businesses were really because it wasn't the right relationship for either of us.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I'm always so curious because my wife and I, like we had never worked well together at all. Like inside of it, like it's just too much conflict when it came to business. And so I've always kind of just navigated the business and she, kind of took care of the family and we kind of knew whose had decision power in certain areas of our life. But recently, we've gone through so much personal growth, like she has, I has, and as a couple over the years that we actually work together really great now. And it's just so interesting to hear, how it's just a personal interest of mine, how people work together and don't work together, what makes it work, what makes it not work. But I guess it is kind of risky to start a business with someone. 'Cause I mean, you really have to depend on the business working and also the relationship, and business can add different dynamics. So that's interesting. But
Absolutely.
it sounds like it worked out for the best in the end. And then am I right in assuming that when you sold the businesses to her, that's when you started this new business with the new methodology of teaching women how to sell? Is that where the...
Oh, no.
No?
Oh, no. I flailed around for quite a while.
Okay. After that. Well, what did you do? What happened after that?
So, well, think about it. Like in one fell swoop, I lost I stepped away from my livelihood, my income, my business, my partner, my apartment, my city, my dogs, like all of that stuff, right? Clean break. No, so I definitely flailed around for a little while. I lived in a friend's carriage house in San Francisco. I stayed a couple months with my family in Nashville, Tennessee, where I'm from. And I ultimately moved to Washington, D.C. to be with my sister and her husband, and they had just had a baby. So I wanted to be near my niece. And I really think that process, that time period, was me kind of reconnecting to myself.
Yeah.
And the things that made me feel fulfilled. I really felt like I wanted to be near family during that time. And crazy enough, so it's just like it's crazy just like how things work out. So I remember I was sitting at my friend's house, her carriage house in San Francisco, and I have a friend who is really into like vision boards and stuff. I'm like mildly into vision boards, but she's like really about it. And because I was so aimless at that time, she said to me, she's like, what you need to do, make a vision board. And so I sat down, I fired up PowerPoint, which is like what I do, because whatever, everything's on PowerPoint. And I started making a vision board, and I had a slide for like my future family and my lifestyle, and all these slides for like different themes. And I couldn't like the slide for my job or whatever my career was going to be was just blank, and I couldn't find anything to put there. Nothing really spoke to me. And I'm not kidding you, I was sitting outside in San Francisco. It's like whatever temperature it is, I'm just like drinking a beer or whatever, and I get a phone call from a woman who I knew from like the LGBTQ community, and she was a close friend of my ex and mine, and she ran a consulting and coaching business, and she's a speaker, and she had seen like us run all the businesses that we ran, and I was very much behind the scenes, like making the trains run. And so she called me and she's like, I need a managing director or managing partner for my business. Are you interested? It's remote. It's, you can do it from wherever. And I was like, it's funny because like, I was like, oh yeah, I'm interested in, learning more about that. I'm such like a duck, like I was super calm on top, but underneath, under the water, I was like super excited. And anyway, she hired me as her managing director to get her business like back on track. And that allowed me to spend time where I needed to, and ultimately move to DC to be near my family. Okay. And so that's how I took everything I had learned when running my business and started applying it to another business.
Gotcha. Okay. So would you classify that as going back to corporate again, or not really?
Not really.
Okay.
Because her business was, it was her and like 3 other people.
Oh, okay.
She, really small, doing really cool stuff, but we definitely had the flexibility to do whatever we needed to turn the business around. Yeah. And, it was great because we doubled her sales in the first year, and then we doubled again the next year. And that's when I realized, okay, I bet that I could apply this to other businesses to help them, with their revenue too.
Okay. And then is that when you moved into what you're doing now?
Yeah. So that's after a few years working with her, I think I just put out a call for like, I'm working with women in this way to help them get clients. And I got a few coaching clients, and I was just working with them one-on-one. And actually a few other clients I was working like heavily embedded in their business, like doing the biz dev. But the thing is, like, at that time, I was doing, it's like that trap we fall into when we're like newly starting a business. We're like, I do all the things.
Right.
Right. I was doing like all the sales operations, all the messaging, all the marketing.
Yeah.
And I think after like 6 months and my third CRM implementation, I was like, this sucks, And I had enough. And I was like, what I really, really want to do is help women actually like know how to get their own clients.
Yeah. And then that started everything you're doing now?
Yeah.
The transition.
So
okay.
that started the sort of coaching business. My first business name, actually, this is so embarrassing, but it's called GrowthWorks Solutions, which is like so hard to say.
Yeah.
Does not roll off the tongue. But I loved this idea of like GrowthWorks, kind of like almost like a factory, Ironworks or something like that.
Right.
So the business was GrowthWorks Solutions for a time, and then it became Smart Gets Paid.
Gotcha. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. And when did family come into the picture? Like when did you, because you had that on your vision board, you said. I'm assuming it came into play because I think you mentioned that.
Yes. Yeah. So I met my wife in 2015.
Okay.
And our son was born in 2019.
14 and 2019. Okay. Well, I mean, from 2011, 2014, those 3 years, there was a lot happening for you. Like that was a lot. I mean, and I feel for you too, to like have to end a relationship, end the businesses, all the things that ended. Like you had a massive shedding going on in your life. And I know that's not easy. And then to have to go through that and to have experienced all that in 3 years, that's not easy. So I definitely commend you for that. And then you did that, and I'm assuming as you were growing this business, you got married, had a kid. How was the transition from just being a non-parent to a parent now with a business? Was that easy, hard, fun, not fun?
I mean, it's all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's still happening, so he's a toddler, and I think your sense of self is always changing.
Right.
And so, of course, like the way you think about yourself before as, a wife and a business owner and like a daughter and all these sort of things that you do. And then to have something come into your life that just takes up so much of your sort of mental space and sense of self. It's really, I'm just going to say it's really jarring. It really is.
Yeah. I had my son born right when we started this business, like literally, I know exactly how old my business is because it's the same age of my son. Like that's the only way that I know. And I mean, it is, it's like, I feel like bouncing that line between showing up for family for a husband, as a husband and as a father, and then also show up as like business owner and leader. Like it's a hard line to walk sometimes. And sometimes the family needs more of you and the business needs more of you and that whole dynamic. Are you still trying to figure out that balance, or do you feel like you have a pretty good handle on it now?
I think it's changing every day, honestly. I mean, as your child grows and they can do more things and, you interact with them differently and, especially with the pandemic, like childcare comes in, childcare goes out, that situation changes.
Right.
It's still something I'm negotiating.
Yeah.
Well, it's all right. I think I was about to say that, before he was born, me being like a total planner type A person, I was like, I'm going to get all the systems in place in my business, and I'm going to do all of these processes and bring all these people on. And I can like make this work and it's going to be seamless and I'm just going to pop back in and like I was never gone and all of that stuff. And what you realize is like your plans just don't mean anything. You know, like you can plan really well, but life is going to be like your child is going to be your child and life is going to be however it is. And your body's going to change and your sleep is going to change and all these things.
Yeah.
And so all that planning probably felt really good at the time. But when I look back at that now, I'm like, oh, if I had known.
I know. I look back the same thing. I look back, I'm like, man, if I would have just known, I could have adjusted better, but you just don't know what you don't know. And that's kind of like what you said too, with every age, it's like different every day because they're getting older. There are different things going on. Like my son's 8 now. And so, you know, when he was 2, it was a lot different than when he's now 8. And then I also have 2 more kids now to throw into the mix as well. So it's just like everything shifts so much more. But it's just great because for me personally, as the business has grown, it's allowed me to actually put more structure into place. And then now as the team has grown, we do have a little bit more structure. It makes the bounce a little bit easier, but it's still difficult because I still don't know what to expect. Like my son now, he wants to like play chess and go for bike rides and he wants to go fishing, which I have to implement into my daily schedule, which I didn't have to do when he was younger and he was just like crawling around. Like when he was crawling around in diapers, I could just put him in the, like his little swing and he could work with me, like sit there in the office. And so it is constantly changing. And it is a difficult line to walk. I kind of want to bring the conversation back towards sales as we wrap up this episode. And I know we talked about decision-making as a huge piece, but what else goes into your methodology when it comes to driving in more sales?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to consider because selling isn't just like a strategy. It's the process of doing a whole lot of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, the key pieces are messaging. I know that's something you work on a lot as well.
Yep.
How do you show up? How does your business and your expertise show up in the world? Getting the right leads, right? Starting conversations, making sure they're with the right people who see the value.
Right.
Really leading a sales process and taking, guiding your clients, pricing and packaging, proposals, all of that.
Right.
And a lot of mindset work. There's so much that we come into this part of our business, so much, like mind trash that works against us. And we have to shine a bright light on that and see where it came from, if it's working for us, and what to replace it with as well.
Okay. And then when it comes to leads, the way you teach it, does it depend on, I'm assuming it depends on who you're selling to and what products you have and different things like that. But is there anything with lead generation that you focus on that maybe some people don't focus on? Or I guess a better question is, what's your philosophy around lead generation so you're bringing in the right people?
Yeah. So I don't teach one way of lead gen. There are, of course, many ways, but I think that the main sort of message of lead generation for me is like, be where your people are and also do it in a way that feels right for you. A lot of women come to me and they've only gotten leads through referrals. And they say to me, yeah, but okay, so I clearly need to do something else. And I say, you actually don't necessarily have to, getting business through referrals, especially, larger contract consulting businesses, you can have a totally great business that way. So, it's just about doing it on purpose with a strategy. If, on the other hand, a lot of women come to me and they're not really doing anything, they're sort of trusting the universe.
Right.
Then we can start to implement some things. I'm really big on LinkedIn. For my clients, their clients are on LinkedIn. So I have a whole LinkedIn methodology. But, it's not about, doing all of the things. Certainly, it's just about doing the things that are going to work for you and that feel comfortable for you.
Got it. I like that. It's kind of like, and this is what I tell people all the time, is that I think a lot of people's programs and methodologies, I'll say fail, but that's not the word I'm looking for. It's more like, well, let's just put it this way. I think the reason why people's programs and methodologies aren't as effective as they can be is because they focus so much on here's what worked for me, here's the structure, here's the thing to do, here's the framework, here's the script, just follow it. And it completely neglects, I always say there's masculine and feminine energy that need to be blended together. And the masculine to me is so much of the actions, here's the scripts, here's the things to go do. The feminine is like the individual, like what are your strengths? What are your things? What are your experiences? What are your, like for me, even like what are your traumas? What are your whatever? And helping a self-discovery process and then putting it within frameworks. And it sounds like that's what you're doing too. You're saying like, here's all the elements we need, but here's who you are as an individual. Let's plug who you are into this process. And I would imagine, again, correct me if I'm wrong, what this does is it brings people to a new level of confidence, comfortability when selling. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. For the LinkedIn piece, let's just look at that alone. It's positioned as a program to help you fill your pipeline, get referrals, start to get visible. But to be honest, what most people tell me it does for them personally is it helps them find their voice. It helps them, feel more confident. It helps them feel like an expert. It helps them have better sales conversations because they feel like they know what it is they're talking about, and they can really, talk about the business in a way that sounds amazing and compelling. So yeah, there are a lot of trickle-down effects when you can find a method that works for you that you can then layer on, like what it is that makes you unique and special.
Right. And I really like that because I always tell people like powerful people create powerful messages and confident people make more sales. And if you're constantly forced into a philosophy or a script or something that's not you, that energy, that tone, that body language that you're now going to present is going to be detrimental to you closing the sale. And so it sounds like what you do in your philosophy really takes that into account is like you get the people to show up. So like even on an energetic level or body language or subconscious level, there is that rapport being built with the people or the people you're selling to. And then when you couple that with figuring out what is the decision that he's made, what's the process, who is, what's the word you used? You didn't say gatekeeper, the stakeholder. You couple all that together, it just sounds like it's like the perfect recipe for generating sales. Is there more to it than that, or is that a pretty good summary of the philosophy that you use?
Well, it is, but every sort of sales situation is slightly different. So I think one of the things that you asked what makes your approach different, or why do some lead gen methods fail, is because lead gen can't work on its own. I don't just teach lead gen.
Right.
I think that would be a huge disservice. I see a lot of that out there. Here's how to get leads, or you say like, here's how to get sales, but really it's just leads. And you have to marry that with, okay, what happens when they become a lead, right? How do you lead a sales process? How do you talk about pricing and all of the, how do you send proposals? And all of that stuff goes hand in hand. And that's really how you get actual sales.
That makes sense. It's the way, even how I describe messaging is I call it a disjointed funnel where there's a focus just on lead gen, then there's a focus on creating a webinar, then there's a focus on a sales page, and there's a focus on emails, and there's a focus on ads. And sometimes they're individual efforts done by contractors. And then when you look at your funnel, you have this hodgepodge of messaging and communication. And like it's very, I think it's you're saying the same thing, is that all has to be connected and intentional and seamless in order to generate the sale. And so I can see what you're saying is like a lot of people teach just certain pieces of it when it's actually a holistic approach, or, I mean, it really is a machine. It's a machine that needs every gear working together. And if one gear's off, then the whole thing falls apart. And so I love that. I mean, I love that approach. It makes a lot of sense to me. If people wanted to learn more about you, they wanted to follow your philosophy or even work with you, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, if you are listening to this and you like podcasts, I have a podcast called the Smart Gets Paid podcast, where I go behind the scenes in actual coaching calls with my clients to tackle their biggest challenges and share, the strategies that we're implementing in those calls. So that's a great place to learn more about how this all works. The Smart Gets Paid podcast. Or on LinkedIn, I'm sharing little snippets and nuggets almost every day. And then, of course, my website, smartgetspaid.com.
Cool. I love it. And we always wrap up every episode with four rapid fire questions. If you're ready, we can hop right into them. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, cool. So you can take as long as you want to answer them. But the first one is, do you believe that entrepreneurship should be taught in schools?
Yes.
And why?
Because I think entrepreneurship is not a thing that you do. I think it's a way you think. And especially for me, coming as, my family's super academic, I am like total academic person. And, if you've ever read that book, Mindset by Carol Dweck, like I was total fixed mindset, very rigid in my thinking, things can't be learned, other things. And when I became an entrepreneur, I had no grit, none, because I was so academic.
Right.
And so that way of thinking, that entrepreneurial way of thinking is something I really had to learn, and it's been painful. Yeah. And so if I had learned it in the venue where I was most comfortable, maybe I could have been, better positioned in my first few years as an entrepreneur.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I like that. I actually had a question come up that popped in my head that I want to ask. It's not one of the normal ones we ask, but I want to ask you is,
I get a bonus rapid fire question.
You do. Yeah, you totally do. So, I might even incorporate this into our future episodes because I really like this question. But the question is, how has having a child affected your approach in business, if it's affected it at all?
Oh my God, that can't be a rapid fire question because
it's like another hour long.
I know. You have like 4 hours and 5 drinks. How has having a child affected my approach to business?
Yeah. Like even just an overview answer. You don't have to get into the specifics, but just an overview approach.
I used to, want everything to go so fast all the time, and I'm still pretty impatient, but, I have this strange new quality to my life where I want everything to slow down. And so I think that, trickles into my business in that, can you appreciate the process? Can you acknowledge that it's not going to go as fast as you want it to, and still like it or love it anyway, right? Yeah. Because in this whole other part of your world, you want everything to slow down so you can appreciate it more.
I love that answer. It's beautiful. And that leads me to the next one is, do you make more decisions with your head or your heart?
Total head. Ask my team.
Yeah. I had a feeling that's what it was going to be. I mean, after interviewing so many people, I found that people that are generally systems orientated or more of like the integrator, they tend to answer with their head. And then people that are more like leaning more towards the visionary side, they tend to usually do heart. But because you said you focus a lot on systems and processes, I knew this question was coming up. I'm like, I'm going to bet she's going to say head. So that's pretty interesting. In 5 years, where do you see yourself?
Oh boy. I see myself, in business, I see myself with, a bigger team. I see myself solving this problem of, women not being able to get clients or make the money that they want to make. I would like to be solving it at a faster rate and at greater scale.
Okay.
If we're really going to solve a bigger problem, we have to do it in a big way.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I see in 5 years.
Okay. And then the last question is, if you could only pick one pivotal moment in your life that changed the direction of everything, what would you say that was?
My stroke.
Oh, definitely. Tell me about that. What happened?
In 2016, I had a stroke at the age of 36. And sort of for unexplained reasons, it's very rare that somebody has a stroke at 36.
Yeah.
But I did. And I mean, it would be an understatement to say it changed everything, but it really changed the way I take care of myself. I take care of my boundaries. I take care of my family and the way I run my business.
Interesting. What do you, when you say boundaries, do you mean in your personal life and business life? What kind of boundaries did you have to adjust?
Yeah. I mean, in business for sure. Setting and maintaining boundaries on my time. Uh, before my stroke, I was working just crazy hours, like I was working with clients one-on-one and trying to solve this problem by taking as many clients as I possibly can and trying to help their businesses. And I realized that's not, that's going to run me into the ground. And it literally almost did.
Yeah.
So boundaries on my time, boundaries on my energy. What can I get really worked up about even? What can I let go of? And that's certainly in business, I guess, and in life too.
Yeah. I mean, I love that answer. And I think boundaries are one of the things that not talked about in business enough. And it's something I've had to learn as well. And it's those, especially with kids, you really, like in raising a family, I had to really learn, and I still am learning how to like set those boundaries into place. Cause the biggest traps that I see entrepreneurs get into, it actually stems from a lack of boundaries, and they drive themselves into the ground and they stick with one-on-one work. They respond to their client, like they're a slave to the business because of basically a lack of boundaries. And at some point, something's going to break. Either the business is going to break or you are. And if you're not going to set those boundaries in the beginning, like you're basically just digging yourself in a hole. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's a super valuable lesson. And as we wrap up the episode, let's just do one more time where people can go to learn about you.
I would love for you guys to check out my podcast, Smart Gets Paid, the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy your podcasts. And find me on LinkedIn and on my website at smartgetspaid.com.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here. For everyone, if you are listening and you're struggling with sales and you're not really sure what to do or how to fix a problem, please go check Leah out at Smart Gets Paid. So Leah, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.